brought that box as a work in progress back to the Mercado owners, they were delighted with it, but they also shared with us something that we hadn't realized before, and that was that a very, very large minority, I think they were predicting 40–45% of these men that we would want to sell cellular phones to, were not literate in their native language, wouldn't be able to read the copy on the box. Well, you know, you might say to yourself, well, that's okay, we'll have to just accept that. At least more than half the people will read it. But a story that's about serving heroes doesn't allow you to do that, doesn't allow you to compromise in your service of heroes. If you're going to serve heroes, my goodness, you have to serve them heroically. So we've started to consider what other means of communication could we engage in to make sure that our story was fully told to all of the people that we would like to serve. And of course, we pretty quickly determined that the most universal technology that would be available to communicate with our audience, with our marketplace, would be if we were to put a tape cassette in the box along with the phone. Almost everybody would have access to a tape player is what we concluded. And so we did. So on that tape, we began by including all of the basic information. How do you initiate service? How do you turn this phone on? How do you buy airtime? All that basic operational information was on the beginning of the tape, but it didn't fill the tape. We had additional space, and we were convinced that we were serving heroes, and we were convinced that we needed to serve them heroically. So here's what we did next. The next section of that tape, we shared with the audience all of the ways that they could in effect take advantage of our company, which is to say, how do you get the very best value? Maybe not all four of you who are living together need to buy a prepaid cellular phone, which all, by the way, you had to buy. You had to pay a couple of $100s for your prepaid phone. So maybe only one or two of you should buy a prepaid phone. You're already a couple of $100s ahead. And oh, by the way, you should pool your purchase of airtime, because if you're buying increments of $25 at a time, you're not buying as much airtime as if you were to buy $100 of airtime at a time. So we loaded the tape with as many of those sorts of bits of advice that we could give that again showed extraordinary loyalty to these heroic Mexican immigrants that we were serving, even if in the short term it might appear as though this would disadvantage our company. We still had room on the tape. And so what we did next is we went back to all those organizations that we had interviewed, all those associations and groups that were in the triangle to serve the Mexican immigrant community, and we gave them the opportunity to tell their story on the tape, to talk about their services, who they were, how to contact them, under what situations should you contact them, and we put that information on the tape. And here's what we discovered about that idea, and that is that when you're being generous to the market, I think there's reciprocity with generosity. People don't want to be out of balance with generosity. If somebody's being generous to you, it's your inclination to be generous back to them. I think it's a wonderfully useful entrepreneurial trait to have, is to be generous. Because when we were generous to put all this additional information on the tape, what we realized after the fact was that we now had a tape that had value beyond the cellular information that was on it, but a tape that had value to the community, regardless of whether they were immediately interested in cellular or not, which is to say that we had a tape that would be exchanged and traded hands and live its own life within the Mexican immigrant community, if for no other reason than that information that was on the back part of the tape. So we created the box, we put the phone and the tape in the box, we brought that to the Mercado owners. They said, oh, what a wonderful package you've got. Yes, indeed, we're very, very excited about working with you with this program. Well, Equitel was out of money. Again, my friend had invited me in to put together an investor story because he needed to go out and raise some additional money. I wasn't making any money on this. I was going to have a little carried interest in the company, if a little stock option in the company if things had become successful. But the company didn't have money to pay me. The executives at the company weren't paying themselves at this point. And so it was as I said, the company had the clarity of a man walking to the gallows, because this was a company that was walking to the gallows. They had run out of capital. So they needed the story in order to raise money to keep going forward. They went to their investor who had put $6 million in the company with the story, and that investor was interested. That investor said, of the $2.5 million that you're now trying to raise to take this business to the market, I'm committed to put $1 million into the company, but I won't put any more than $1 million in the company. I just don't have the capital to do so. So it was up to us to go find additional investors. As I said, it was the point in time where people just weren't investing. We called on a number of investors, and they weren't investing. So we pulled together the little bit of capital that we could. We tried to create some packages of some boxes with the phones in them so that we can bring them to the Mercado owners and do a test market. It was a limited test market. I forget, was it 25 or so units that we were able to put together. They flew off the shelves very, very quickly. We thought that perhaps that proof of concept that the dogs would eat the dog food would be sufficient to now help us raise the capital that we needed. And just like you'll hear in some wonderfully romantic movies about how unrequited love is that love that stays with you forever, this became an unrequited love. We were not able to raise the capital needed to bring this product to market. And therefore, maybe that's the reason why I've always been so very, very fond of what I learned by working on this company, working on this idea, and what it is that I learned, and we'll have some subsequent videos about the power of story, is that when you develop the right story that shapes, that defines, that illuminates, that illustrates the marketplace opportunity, when you've got that right story, you know you've got that right story when the story starts to tell you what you should do to make the story come true.